Well, good morning, friends, and welcome to another installment of Memorable Monday here on Let's Talk with Radio Pulpit. And I'm Rocky Stevenson, pastor of Benoni Bible Church, and what a joy it is to be with you once more. And today we go all the way back into history, looking at 313 AD. And we're exploring the game-changing Edict of Milan. The Edict of Milan. Now, you remember that Milan is there in Italy. But imagine a world where Christians were persecuted for their faith, receiving imprisonment and torture and even death for their beliefs. Now, this was the reality of the Roman Empire for centuries. But in 313 AD, something extraordinary happened that would forever alter the course and the status of Christianity. In the year 313 AD, the two Roman emperors, Constantine and Licinius, issued a joint decree known as the Edict of Milan. And this edict marked a profound shift in the Roman Empire stance towards Christianity. But before we dive into the implications, I want to set the stage for this. And the Roman Empire by this time was vast and diverse, encompassing just numerous religions and belief systems. But Christianity had been steadily growing despite intense persecution. Emperor Diocletian, for example, his great persecution, which was from 303 to 311 AD, had been particularly brutal. We've covered some of that before on Memorable Monday. But he targeted Christians throughout the empire. But with the ascension of Constantine and Licinius, a new era emerged, and one wonders if the prayers of countless Christians was being answered at this time through this political shift. For example, 1 Timothy 2 verse 1 to 2, which says, First of all, then, I exhort that petitions and prayers, requests and thanksgivings be made for all men, for kings and for all who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. And one wonders how many Christians that were being persecuted were praying for Emperor Diocletian and praying for Constantine and praying that God would make a massive difference in their world. And here we have Licinius and Constantine in Milan signing an edict. And this Edict of Milan, at its core, granted religious tolerance to Christians. It did more than just put an end to persecution. It recognized Christianity as a legitimate religion within the empire. And this was a seismic shift in the status of Christianity, because before this it was basically outlawed, and you were allowed to persecute Christians and even kill Christians before this time. And so this was a massive move in a positive direction for liberty of the Christian faith. And I do want to say just at the outset that all freedom of religion really stems from Christianity. Christianity is that which has fought for the freedom of religion of all other religions, even in our world. But this Edict of Milan then symbolized this newfound era of religious freedom. No longer were Christians hunted down for their faith. They could openly practice and worship without fear or of persecution. And this granted Christians the freedom to then build churches, to gather and assemble for worship, to spread their faith throughout the empire. And secondly, it marked the beginning of Christian influence on Roman politics and society. Now, Constantine himself, famously, as we've touched on before, came to a supposed conversion into Christianity. Now, whether or not he truly became saved is questionable, as we looked at last week. However, it may be that he truly was born again, and under his rule, the faith gained prominence. Christianity then began to become something that was no longer outlawed but started to take center stage, and Christian leaders were consulted on important matters regarding the state. And so the church began receiving even imperial patronage, which meant that there was more money towards building churches, there was more money toward missions. However, it is important to note that the Edict of Milan did not make Christianity the official state religion of the Roman Empire, and we'll look at that probably in a few week's time with Memorable Monday, but it did set the stage for what became known later on as the Edict of Thessalonica, which happened in 380 AD. So 380 AD, later on, we do have that another edict that comes about, and an Edict of Thessalonica. Now, so from 313 to 380, you have many years in between, 67 years of really growth within the church, peace within the church. There was not this there was proper separation of church and state in many respects, but then you get to the Edict of Thessalonica in 380 AD, also known as the Contus Populus decree, which then declared Christianity to be the state religion. So only in 380 AD did you have then the Holy Roman Empire, as you would have the church mixed with the state in 380 AD. But all the way here from 313 AD till 380, you have almost a bit of a golden era of Christianity, as the Roman Empire was so big and was in such control of so many nations at that time, and Christianity being not outlawed anymore, but actually starting to become a well-known and even respected religion within the lands of Rome. You had just the spread of the gospel in amazing ways. Now, we do need to remember what our Lord Jesus said in regard to this in Matthew 22:21, where Jesus, they hold up some of the denarius for Jesus, and they say, they're asking him about the taxes, and Jesus asks them, hold that up, and whose face is that? Whose image is on there? And they say Caesar's. And then he said to them, therefore, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And in that realm, our Lord Jesus gives us that split between church and state. We know that there are three different spheres of authority. We have the family, we have the state, and we have the church, and they each serve their own function. And the church should always be able to be a voice to the state, but they should never be running the state, and neither should the state be running the church. And so there ought to be that proper split between, or the proper split between church and state. And you remember even with what Peter said to the authorities of his day in Acts 5:29, he said, and the other apostles, they answered and said, we must obey God rather than man. But the Edict of Milan's impact was not limited just to the Roman Empire alone. It played a vital role in the broader history of religious freedom. Its principles of tolerance would then influence future laws and charters on religious freedom and liberty, even beyond the Roman Empire's borders. And so this that happened at 313 AD is just absolutely pivotal for when it comes to the freedom of religion, even in our world. And the Edict of Milan wasn't without its complexities and even its questions, and some scholars debate whether Constantine's conversion was genuine or politically motivated. If I look back at the history, I don't even know quite if Constantine truly came to saving faith or not. But when we look at it from a distance, from where we are, it's difficult to tell, and there's so many different scholars that have different opinions regarding Constantine's conversion. But whether the edict was truly about religious freedom or whether it was about political stability, what we can see is that God in His mercy extended a hand of much peace and mercy towards the church that had been so persecuted before this time. And these nuances then also remind us that history it's quite multifaceted, with various motivations and interpretations. And when we're looking at church history, I've been doing this now for you for a while with Memorable Monday, but we got to remember that only the Bible is infallible. When we look at history, we're looking at different people giving opinions over different times. Now, there are facts in history, but there's also sometimes fiction in history as well. And many a times we want to story tell history, but the grand reality is that history is His story. It's all of what God has been doing in the ages through man, and the way in which He has been accomplishing His purposes and giving Himself glory and doing good for mankind, and the gospel message that comes out through history. And what we can see when we look back at this is that God was so merciful to the church, and the church had some 60 63, 67 years of great peace between this and even 380. And even from 380 onwards, there were some wonderful gains when it came to the church within the world at that time. But in conclusion, the Edict of Milan was this watershed moment in history, transforming the status of Christianity from a persecuted faith to one that was recognized and protected by the state. And it ushered in an era of religious freedom that laid a foundation for Christianity's eventual ascent to the position of the Roman Empire's official religion. And that's where some of the dangers started to come later on in 380. But here we are, 313. And as we reflect even on that pivotal moment, we are reminded of the enduring importance of religious tolerance and the freedom and freedom really in shaping societies and the world that we live in. And the Edict of Milan reminds us that even in the face of persecution and even adversity, the light of faith, the light of the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ shines brightly and can change the course of history. And we ought to cry out to the Lord regarding our government at this time, regarding our leaders at this time. We should take seriously what we see in 1 Peter 2 and pray for all men. So thank you for joining me with this memorable Monday as we journeyed back to 313 AD and as we explored this. But here we are in 2023. Will you not then pray for our leaders, pray for our government, pray for our president, that the Lord in his mercy would once more give us as Christians that time to have peace and religious freedom where we can continue to share the gospel with those that are around us. And you notice the words even of what we find there in that marvelous passage, 1 Timothy 2 verse 1-2, for kings and all that are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity. That's what you and I are called towards, leading a tranquil, quiet life in all dignity and all godliness and dignity. And as soon as that is being threatened, oh brothers and sisters, then we are being called more towards our knees, towards prayer. And when we bow down before God, we have no fear of standing up before men. May the Lord help us in this regard. If you ever want to reach me, you're welcome to do that at pastor@benonibiblechurch.co.za. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.